I'm Tom Landon. Join me as we learn what it takes to provide excellent customer service. Welcome to What It Takes. My guest today is Bryan, a respected advertising man with a long history in the Roanoke Valley and beyond. But he's here today to share the lessons he's learned as a server in the food industry, which are fully on a display in a new book called Turning Tables, Lessons from Restaurant Professionals that Can Transform Careers. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
This is an interesting show to me because we do on this program talk about things about education and community and health and opportunity. And the opportunity one is often focused on business and business practices. You and I have known each other a long time. I'm excited for people to get to know you.
Well, I'm looking forward to spending some more time with you. Thanks.
Before we get started, what led you to this point? Talk a little bit about your career and growing up and how you got onto this topic.
So my first job as a 16-year-old was as a server at a senior living facility. And shortly after that, I went away to college and I worked through high school. And when I came back in the summers, I worked at a couple of different restaurants throughout college. And I just remembered how many of those lessons I carried with me as I went through my professional sales career and then started my own company. And so it feels like it's always been there on the edge, ready to be written.
I think our first jobs and our early jobs really do shape. I was a bike mechanic early and a paper boy and all kinds of other things. And I think I learned lessons that I haven't really thought about, but that stick with me. Let's talk about some of the lessons you did learn as a server and your very first serving job at a place called Kendall.
Yeah, I worked at Kendall at Longwood, and they actually have locations all around, but they have one in Lexington, senior living. And it was a lot of residents who were used to being cared for at country clubs and fine dining establishments. And it was a lot of high school kids serving. So you learned on your feet how to care for Mr. Brown and Mrs. Smith and make sure that they were, given civilized service, right?
And did those customers, were they part of your training? Like as you're serving these people?
Yeah, you walk in really not knowing anything. And it's on purpose. They have a lot of high school kids. But we learned some of the basics of service. And then like anything else, you get better as you go. Now, they're eating there at 2 or 3 days meals a day, right? But you have to meet them where they are. And then eventually, if you do a good job, you start to become their favorite. And Mrs. Green is always asking for you. And it didn't hurt that we had gone to a church where a lot of the people that live there had also gone. So I knew there were a handful of familiar faces. And it was near my house, so it worked out really well.
And a nice way to break into it. It's not like you were working for tips and there was a manager breathing down your neck to turn the tables.
That's right.
But what were some of the things you learned that then set you up to work in restaurants later?
Yeah, so one of the things that happened is I did have a manager. I'll never forget Janet. She was tough on us, and I remember always saying, "Do your side work." And the end of your shift, you're a high school kid. You're ready to go and do whatever fun or homework, whatever might be going on. And she'd always ask, "Did you do your side work?" And you start to realize that for the shift to go well, the salt packets or the salt shakers have to be filled, and the sugar packets have to be stuffed, and the butter has to be put in the refrigerator, all those kinds of things. So I really did learn the basics of looking out for other people and working in a team environment. And then over the summers in college, one was a family restaurant, and one was a more like a mid-range, nice
place with white tablecloths and silver.
A little nicer. Now, I did that at lunchtime, so I learned about turning tables quickly, whereas dinner, it's a little more leisurely. But I will say this, it was the mid to late 80s, and there were people drinking at lunch then. So I learned early on, if I could get one person to drink, I could get multiple people to drink. And then also dessert was a thing. People would linger at lunches back in the 80s, whereas now it's get in, get out,
Well, and before we talk about a lot of the lessons you learned, I mean, there's been kind of a seismic change since you and I were in high school where, yes, people used to go out at lunch and drink. If you had an office job, it wasn't frowned upon to go have a couple martinis or beers at lunch. But also for kids, I think the employment landscape has really changed for kids because their lives are so much more structured. You and I grew up in a time when our parents said, go get a job.
Go out and play, kid.
Kids today don't have as much time for that if they're in league soccer and they're, doing all these things. And also there's safety issues we worry about. Do you feel like I do that we've lost some things in not making that a part of growing up for as many kids?
I don't know if it's lost, but I think things are different. I was listening to an interview recently where they were talking about youth sports and how if you wanted to play sports back in those days, you had to pick up your phone and call your friends and get together. And now there's an organized practice 5-6 days a week, and the adults take care of everything. And I think there is a little bit of the adults taking care of everything that happens on that daily job, summer job circuit as well. And I've seen that as a hiring manager when people want internships. It's kind of humorous, the things that kids cannot do and the kinds of things that parents are trying to do for their kids.
I've heard stories of parents coming to interviews.
Yes, I didn't have that, but I had some pretty wild ones, similar to that. And like you, I mean, think about it. You were working as a bike mechanic and your love for bikes continues. And I just think that when a 16 to 22-year-old person, I won't say kid, but when they're thrust into an environment they're not used to, you really have no choice but to learn and go, right? And I think that has helped me professionally because learning and going is so much a part of the opportunities, not just that are given to you, but the opportunities that you create, right?
Tell me about Hearn's, the Hearn's restaurant. Where was this, and describe the restaurant and the people who went there and the patrons.
Yeah, so I try to put it in context that people here in Virginia might understand. It was an old school family restaurant. My parents moved to downtown Wilmington, Delaware when I went away to college. I started out in school at Miami University in Ohio. I came back and I didn't know anybody. My parents had moved 20, 30 minutes away from my hometown. And I needed a job and I looked across the parking lot and I thought, well, I know how to wait on tables. Let me go over and I got the job. Well, I was I was the outlier because everybody else there, all the other servers were women in their 50s. One was named Dolly. I think the other was named Martha. And I don't really need to say anything else.
Right, Dolly and Martha, you're right. And I think of it, those of you, again, who are from Roanoke, we've got viewers all around the area, but the Roanoke restaurant, which
it would have been the Roanoke,
open, but
yeah, the Roanoke restaurant, much smaller. So it was nicer than a diner, right? But they had a lunch special every day. They had 3 or 4 kinds of pies, and they serve salmon croquettes and they served chicken and dumplings, which was amazing, right? At the end of the shift, you'd get to eat a little bit of the chicken and dumplings and they were great. Haven't had them really much since then, but it was that kind of restaurant with the pink printed plates, a ceramic plates.
Sure, meat and drink.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And again, I worked lunches, which was great for a college kid because I was free in the evenings. In fact, my dad used to get really irritated because I'd go in at 9:30 and be done at 1:30 or 2. And he would say, well, you need to work more hours. And I said, well, Dad, I'm making more than my friends that are landscaping or bike mechanics or working in an office, even though they had air conditioning, And I learned a lot from Dolly. But if you mess up and you messed up Dolly's shift, you knew about it.
Yeah, let's talk about Dolly a little bit. And she was a mentor, right? Although maybe an involuntary one. You got to observe her.
Yeah, both. I think the thing that was funny about Dolly is she would be just what you'd expect. I think as soon as the shift ended, maybe in the middle of the shift, she was out on the back, porch smoking her cigarette, and she had her regulars and people. I want to sit in Dolly's section. And if you accidentally picked up one of her tables, you did that one time.
Well, because that meant you were taking money from her.
That is exactly right. And you had to carry your end of the bargain. And she was a lifer and she came back and worked the evening shift, right? So the owners did not want Dolly to be unhappy. Right. But I did learn. I'd watch her and figure out how she did things. And in a lot of ways, it's about efficiency, Tom, And again, those are lessons that you carry with you throughout your whole career. When I was telling somebody about this book, somebody in Roanoke, a business leader, he said, yeah, man, I was a server too. And he said, I always remember safe steps. That's a good one, safe steps. And it carries throughout life.
Yeah, let's talk about how those experiences, and we'll talk about, some of the other places you worked, but the lessons you learn that apply
to life,
and and helping you when you did show up at your first non-restaurant, professional out of college job?
Yeah, it was almost across the street from here. It was a little UHF TV station, and I was working as a master control operator. Embarrassed, but I'll say I think I was making $4.25 an hour. Found out that we were going to have a child, and I marched into the sales manager's office, scared as could be, palms sweaty, knees weak, and I said, I've waited on tables. I know I can sell. Give me a chance. She said, well, what makes you think you? And I gave her a couple of examples, and she's like, all right, we'll give the kid a chance. And for me, a lot of what I learned was about taking responsibility. Because think about when you go out to eat, if a server says, oh, the kitchen messed that up, or oh, that person messed that up, the meal just doesn't.
Well, there's no resolution, right? If you blame it on somebody else, then the customer is still unhappy.
Right. So the best thing you can do is take responsibility. Oh, I mix it up. Let me go and take care of that. And it's really not about the problems that happen in food service, because it's a shift and it's 3 hours and there's going to be problems, but it's about the resolutions, right? And that's really been my whole career. I was in broadcasting for over 2 decades, and you talk about problems. You go in the morning, everything seems great, and then by 9:30, you're trying to figure out how all these pieces can be re-put together in a new puzzle. And it was so much of what happened on the floor and at the weight
reacting
station.
to things that are beyond your control.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that was really great about this project. So I made it a point to talk to a lot of servers, some that were still in food service and some that had moved on, matriculated to other careers. And I remember Katie Martin is a NICU nurse trainer, and she would talk a lot about how in her work at the hospital, she's perpetually having to reorder the things that are happening because, sick children have issues and those take priority. And so you're having to resort. And she said, honestly, it's really like what I did during a shift, because the old saying, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face. And, if you're going through your shift and you go to get the butter and the butter's empty, now you got to go get the butter, and then and that throws things off. And it really is about juggling your tasks and shifting your priorities.
Thinking on your feet and having a plan. That initial contact with a customer, when you walk up to a table and you talk about kind of the lazy way to do it, which is to say, how's everybody doing today?
Yeah.
And what a wasted opportunity that is, and how that applies in business. So let's just take that simple concept and talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I think when I think about business, I used to train teams of sellers, and I would say all the time, if you've had a meeting with somebody and you go back in and you make the assumption a week or 10 days later with this prospective client that they're where you left them, that's a big mistake. People are never where you left them. They're like, picture them like a toddler. You set a 3-year-old down and you go to the other room and you come back. There's no chance they're where they were then. And I think what happens is we oftentimes in customer-facing jobs try to get people to where we are. And what I think works really well is if you move yourself a little closer to where the person is, where the people are. So if you think about a server, if they come in fired up and you're stressed because you couldn't find a parking place and it's your first date or whatever it might be, that you're with your mother-in-law, who knows? They don't know. And I think a lot of times servers come busting in, trying to get you to be where they are. And it's like that in business too. You have to pay attention to what's happening around you and try to, I won't say mirror because that's a little trite, but try to align or match those conversations so that you go to where people are. And if you can master that skill, then, that will carry you in a lot of different business situations.
And it's also that idea of like, how are we doing today is fluff. It's just fluff. It doesn't mean anything and it doesn't really help.
Right.
What are some alternatives that you can think of that someone might say in that situation that would tell you they're really on top of it?
Yeah, because the we implies that you're with us. And, we've seen from those Progressive commercials, you don't need to introduce yourselves. You don't necessarily need to be best friends. But I think it's better to say, hey, it looks like, I don't like it when people say, is this your first time here? because it can hurt somebody's feelings if they've been there 20 times and you're the new employee. So it's better to say things like, a way to meet people where they are. So, hey, are you interested in hearing about the drink specials we have right now? Or, oh man, I just delivered this pizza to this other table and it's really great. Have you thought about the kinds of things you might be interested in eating tonight? Or, so, are you newer in town? Have you been anything to start to kind of meet people where they are? And I think part of it is walking up to the table and obviously start with a smile, because usually people will respond to a smile with a smile, but observe where they are and help them get to a little bit better place.
Pick up some cues early on.
Yes.
Yeah, speed things along.
Yeah.
You and I share a love with our wives of eating at the bar.
Yes.
And sometimes here in town, there are places like if I'm going to a restaurant, it's a little impromptu. I don't have a reservation. Maybe I just go sit at the bar, especially when I'm on the road. But how is that experience different? Let's say where you're in a nice restaurant, but you take a seat at the bar. What do you get out of that is different from sitting at a table?
When you go to a restaurant as a single person and you say, I'd like a table, they'll say just one. And you're like, yeah, but maybe that's okay. I just was happy to just have a quiet meal. When you go to the bar and sit down, you can disappear if that's what you want to do, or you can have a conversation with the bartender because they're facing you, whereas a server's going by you. Sometimes you might get acquainted with the people sitting on either side of you. I've had crazy experiences where we've become actual friends with people that were sitting near us, right? And that's a little easier to do when you're there as a couple versus when you're there by yourself, because that has
something that's a little more okay about eavesdropping on somebody's conversation and adding some little, oh, you should try this.
Right,
to it.
right.
It might
Otherwise,
be weird if you're
awkward if you're on your own,
especially single guy.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it. But it's fun to watch how the server or the bartenders, they're obviously serving food, but they can multitask. Like they can do a lot of things at once, including talking to you. And one of the things I've seen people do is, ask the server, where do you like to go? And that's a really fun thing to do also, or ask the bartender, where do you like to go? What do you like to do? Because you can learn the town or the region just by talking to some of those bartenders, right?
Yeah, you didn't just talk to servers and bartenders. You reference a lot Bryan at the Hotel Roanoke. Maybe you can talk about him a little bit and what lessons he's helped you see from being a good customer service person and boss that other people can apply in business.
So when I told Bryan about this book, he said, oh man, I'd love to talk to you about that. And I get that a lot from people that were in food service that are now doing other things. Bryan was the general manager of the year at the Hotel Roanoke in 2024 across the whole country. And it's really based on the fact that he's a servant leader. He really puts his people and his customers first. And you've worked for people who put their employees first and maybe don't care for the customers the way they should. That's not good. And then I've worked for and seen people that put customers a priority and don't care for their people. And what's interesting about Bryan is he does both together simultaneously. We were there, a group of us were there. I think there were 6 of us there earlier this year at the hotel. And he came by, he knew we were going to be there for dinner. And he came by and he greeted us and said hello to our friends, which were 2 friends we had met at a bar, actually in another state, and they had come to Roanoke specifically to hang out with us for that weekend, and we went to dinner. And I watched Bryan go over and pick up a couple of wine glasses and some napkins and say, well, it's great to see you guys, have a great night. And he proceeded to carry them over and he bussed his own table. General manager of an award-winning general manager of this amazing resort hotel, and he is willing to do what leaders should do, which is take care of the little stuff. But he started as an oyster boy in Massachusetts at a restaurant up there where he kind of like back then there were dessert carts and sometimes there was tableside guacamole. Well, he would take a cart and move it around, I think during happy hour, and shuck oysters for people that were enjoying their evening, so to speak.
That's an interesting space because you're you stay there for a while, kind of part of the conversation, but you also have to be in the background and not interfere with what's going on. Right?
And it's putting on a show, right? And how many times, I mean, no offense to hosts of TV shows, but when you're putting on a show, you're putting on a show, and nobody that's watching is going to care if you have a sore foot or a toothache or whatever. The show must go on. And that's the way it is if you're an oyster boy. And that's the way it is if you're the general manager of the Hotel Roanoke.
Oyster boy. That's a new
that
a new
awesome?
job for me. Now I want to talk to you a little bit. I've never worked for tips. I've worked in a restaurant as a dishwasher, and I've worked in lots of other customer service places, but I've never worked for tips. And you talk about kind of the value of that in this book, and what is and how does that apply to, like, you're a commission salesperson, right? It's really the same.
It is really the same. I was going to say it's exactly the same. Most of the commission jobs I had, at least early in my career, there was a measure of salary plus commission, but there were some that was straight commission. And then as I moved into management, it was often compensation that was
Tied to sales.
tied to sales.
Yeah.
But it is just like working for tips. And one of the things that I think that happens is when you're working for tips, you realize that the other person's performance impacts you the same way. And you're all in it together. Every TV station, every company I think I worked at, the way it worked out, they were trying to figure out how to redo the compensation plan. And what I did at each stop in my career was help them make sure that how they were paying people aligned with the outcomes they were looking for as leaders. And you know, I loved working for tips because you went in the morning and you never knew what you were going to make that day. And if you did a great job, not every time, but oftentimes you'd come out going, I did really well. It was a strange thing at the end of the shift, right? I think I told you before, the shift would end at 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And it was very strange to me because you'd see that four top, that's what we call it in the business.
Right.
You see that four top walking in and you're looking at them and you're thinking, if they don't seat them in my section, I can leave and go play. But if they seat them in my section, then I can make some more money. And okay, so you realize you don't have any control where they're going to seat them. So it doesn't matter what you're rooting for, but you have to treat that table like they're the most important table you have.
Sure.
And sometimes it leads to extra good things. The other thing I've noticed real quick is that last table at the end of the shift, as things start tapering down, and you'll notice this as a diner, sometimes it's hard to care for those tables when it's the only table you have, because you start doing other things and think, oh goodness, I have to get back to that table or do that thing.
And you don't want them to make them feel like they have to
hovering
leave.
or they have to leave. But then by the same token, when you have 4, 5, 6 tables going, you're going and you're moving and you're multitasking, if you will, and thinking about the triage of the next thing. And you can really accomplish more because you're in a flow.
Well, and I had almost no appreciation for tip work until my wife Beth and I gave birth to a natural-born salesperson. Our son Max he's a medical device salesman, loves it and lives for that sort of that rush of engagement and selling. And when we talk about tipping, I like to be thought of as a pretty good tipper. How important, what would you say to somebody who, people grumble about tipping?
Yes.
And also we're given an awful lot of opportunities to tip in situations where we didn't used to tip. But, what do you say to somebody who's maybe not a great tipper?
Usually servers are the best tippers. And that's kind of the way it works. I struggle because if they're standing up, it's hard for me to tip somebody that's standing there with me, like across
behind
the
counter at the coffee shop.
It's a little different, but I also feel that peer pressure, and so I'll tip. So one of the things I'll say is these people are caring for you. And nobody goes to a restaurant for a bad experience. And if you think about good experiences you've had, many of them happen at a table and oftentimes at a restaurant. And so I think good tippers tend to be people that are empathetic. How's that? And I think where I struggle.
Can you put yourself in that person's
their shoes?
Yeah.
And then one of the things I think about is times are hard for a lot of people. So I'm not saying that at all. But one of the things that I'll think about is, does this $5 mean more to me or does it mean more to them? And one of the things that my wife and I did during COVID was when the food service industry was hit really hard, is we would once a month pick somebody randomly and give them a little extra special tip. And that was really fun. And we didn't ever tell them we were doing it. We just do it and leave. And not like the ones that make the news, not that kind of money. But I just think these are folks that are working really hard. And what they're trying to do is give you a better experience. So it's good to recognize that.
Yeah, we only have about a minute left, but I want to talk about the book. Where can people buy it? It's in stores, right?
Yeah, it's anywhere books are sold. And I miss having that local bookstore in Roanoke, but local bookstores are really the lifeblood. It's also available in the brick and mortar stores and online. And we make it easy for people to buy, that's for sure. And I'm talking to some book clubs and getting a chance to talk to business organizations about some of these lessons that you let me share today. So thank you.
You just finished this one. You're just starting to talk about it. But, is this something you want to keep doing?
I do have an idea for another book, and it's in the back of my brain. And I know what it takes to write it is one thing, and then to get it from written to this place is another thing. So I have to get the energy up, but I'll start talking to people, I bet, next year about this next one. Maybe it'll be one of the people I talk with about.
Great. And I will just say, I don't read a lot of business books. It's not something I spend a lot of time on.
Me either.
But I did enjoy reading this one quite a bit, and I would recommend it for anybody who is kind of in the business world and wants to read more. So Turning Tables is available in several local bookstores, as well as Bruce said, as the online retailers where many of us purchase our books. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Lane.